Gemara. Good morning. We are learning Leilanish Masmindal Mariam Bas Kamadurah Hasham Shadaliyah. We are on the bottom of Kuf Lam and Gimel Amud Beis. We're going to learn a whole lot of medical advice. Take it or leave it. Probably leave it for now. But medical advice that was whatever. From 2,000 years ago. This was common practice. And again, I just go mention once again, according to most of our commentators, this was, we don't take this as not codified in halacha. But the takeaway is, to me, and our sages were concerned about our health. Our health is an integral part of halacha. We have an obligation to be healthy, and therefore our sages, in addition to teaching us, what you can and cannot do for, a move on Shabbos and all the laws of Muksa, they said, okay, and these are the health laws, and so, okay, nowadays these may not be so relevant, but that doesn't excuse us from not taking care of our health. Okay, so v'nosanon alav isbalanis. So the Mishnah said that you put a bandage and cumin over the wound. Amar Abaye. Abaye says, Amar li my mother said to me. Now, actually, he's not actually referring to his mother.
By the way, what was the cumin supposed to do?
It was seen as like a curative. It was seen as like a...
I understand. What is it supposed to be doing?
It heals the wound, meaning it was going over the wound. It was somehow healing the wound. I don't know. So, I don't know. I didn't dig too deeply. Okay, but I'm really aimed. So Abaye says his mother told him. Now, whenever we see Abaye talking about his mother's he actually was orphaned at a very young age. He was talking about he had a nurse who took care of him, and she was referred to as his mother. There's actually some interesting discussion. There's one of the sources that people point to in terms of a larger discussion about adoption, in terms of whether or not that's like having a child. Meaning, let's say someone adopts a child, or let's talk in a case where a person can't have children and they adopt children. Do we consider that to be? Is that really a form of some form of fulfillment? But okay, you can't bring a proof over here. But Abaye does refer to this woman as his mother, but she was also clearly very medically knowledgeable, because he quotes her all the time for medical advice. And what does she say? Isbelanisa dechulun kive. A salve, compress for all pains, for all types of pains, is made up of what? Shav minay tarba v'chad akira, made of 7 parts of fat and 1 part of wax. Rava Amar Kira v'kalba rishina. Rava said the best compress is made of wax and resin. Okay. Darsha Rava Mechoza. Rava was once teaching in the city of Mechoza, and he taught this, and he said the best compress is made of wax and resin. Karinu b'nei Manyume asi lamanayu. The family of Manyume, which was a family of physicians, they literally tore their garments. In other words, they were so upset. Why? Because he was releasing medical secrets. This was their job, and he's going ahead. It's like you get up and show, and you say, "This is how you make Coca-Cola." Like what? All the Coca-Cola executives lose their minds. So over here, he's teaching what the things that only the doctors knew, and Rava's teaching that publicly. So they're all upset. Amar lahu, Rava said to them, "Don't worry, shavki lechu chada. I kept one secret cure for you. Okay, which I didn't reveal. What is that?" Amar Shmuel said, "Haiman demashe apev lo nagav tuv." A person who washes their face and does not dry it well. Okay, so nixur. So it's seen as unhealthy, cause face, blemishes, etc. Nixur chaspanisa, right? Boils will break out on the person's face. Maita kante, what's the remedy? Limshi tuve b'mayin desilke, let the person wash themselves well in water in which beets have been cooked. Okay, you can try it, but that's the secret that he kept for them, and that calmed them down. Okay, lo shachak me'erev Shabbos. The Mishnah says if a person did not crush the cumin before Shabbos, it's necessary, it's needed, but you could get away without. You could get away with taking care of it in a way that is not so direct. In other words, you need to take care of the cumin. You need to crush the cumin to administer it on the wound. But let's say you didn't crush it, so how do you crush it? So the Mishnah said you chew it in your teeth and then you apply it. Similarly, the Mishnah said if you didn't mix the wine and oil before Shabbos, then each of them should be, you're not supposed to mix them thoroughly on Shabbos. Why not? So let's just quickly discussion about mixing. There's there's something called lush, which we'll get into. Lush is basically making a dough-like material. So anytime you're mixing things which make a dough-like substance, that's asur on Shabbos. There's discussion. That's certainly a thick dough-like thing. A thin-like thing is a matter of some more debate. You're allowed to mix 2 liquids together. There's something which remains a liquid. There's no issue. You can make mixing 2 substances which remain a completely liquid, making chocolate milk on Shabbos, putting that's fine. That's fine. So really, there's no issue putting wine and oil from a biblical perspective. It's not included in lush, which is kneading. However, the Gemara tells us that mixing it vigorously, which is the way they mixed it, that is what we call uvda dechol. It's like a weekday activity, and that cannot be done. Okay, so over here for the child, what you are allowed to do is place them both in the bowl by themselves, and they get mixed together. That's okay. Then you're not mixing it vigorously. Okay, fine. So Tana Rabbanan, it was taught things which are not done for bris milah on Shabbos are allowed to be done on Yom Tov, meaning shochkin la kamon, you're allowed to crush the cumin, because why? Because any food related thing you're allowed to do on Yom Tov. So therefore, even though on Shabbos you wouldn't be allowed to crush something on Shabbos, to crush spices on Shabbos, you're allowed to do so on Yom Tov. It's torfin la yain v'shemen, and you're allowed to mix the wine and oil vigorously because that's normally a food type of preparation, and therefore you could similarly do that on Yom Tov. Okay, Amalei Abayla Rav Yosef. Abai says to Rav Yosef, Ma'ishna kaman b'Yom Tov. What's the reason you're allowed to make cumin on Yom Tov? Like, what's the reason you're allowed to crush it on Yom Tov? Dechazlik dera, because it's fit for food. In other words, the reason you're allowed to crush cumin on Yom Tov is because you're allowed to prepare cumin for spices as a food, and therefore yain v'shemen chazi nami b'Shabbos lechola. He says, using the same logic, wine and oil are allowed to be prepared for a sick person. We're not talking about a sick person who is dangerously ill, but a person who's mildly ill. The Mefarshim give an example of someone who has like a chronic, low-grade illness. So you're allowed to do certain things. You're allowed to prepare oil and wine by mixing them for the sick person. The Tanya was taught in a brayso to support this. In Torf and Yain V'Shem L'chol B'Shabbos, you are not. The Tanakama says you're not allowed to mix wine and oil for a sick person on Shabbos. Rav Shimon ben Elazar, Mishmer Meir. However, Rav Shimon ben Elazar says in the name of Meir, Af Torf and Yain V'Shem. You are allowed to vigorously mix wine and oil for a sick person. Now, before we continue, we're ultimately going to ask if since you're allowed to prepare it for a mildly ill sick person, why can't you prepare it for a bris milah? Why is it not allowed, right? Fine. So before we do that, let's just finish the brayso. Fascinating give and take. Rav Shimon Elazar. Rav Shimon Elazar reports, Pam achas chash Rameir b'meav. Rameir once had stomach pains. Uvikash l'trif lo yain v'shem. And we, his students, wanted to mix oil and wine as a therapy, as medication for him. V'lo nichanu. He didn't allow us. Amarnulo, your own opinion is going to be nullified in your days. Again, Rameir just told us you are allowed to prepare wine and oil, mixing them vigorously for someone who is mildly ill. Rameir is now ill. His students say, "Oh, Rebbe, we're allowed to do this. You just told us you're allowed to do this." They start mixing. Hey, don't do it. Why not? You just told us you're allowed to do it. Amar Lanu, he said to us, even though I said this, and my colleague said that, meaning this is my own opinion. Nonetheless, although if you call me and ask me what to do, I will tell you you're allowed to mix wine and oil because that's what I hold. I will never. Rameir says, as a rule for myself, if my colleagues disagree, I will defer to them. For my own practice. In other words, he felt the right thing is you're allowed to mix wine and oil. You'd call him on a shaila, you're allowed to do it. But if he knows his colleagues disagree, for his own self, he wouldn't do it. But the bottom line is, right? Hu nihu demachmer nafshe. Rameir is being strict for himself. Avalakuliyama shari, but he would allow it for others, and therefore the Gemara is asking, why does our Mishnah not allow the mixing of wine and oil vigorously? Why is it not allowed to be done? So Rav Yosef explains, Hasam laboy licha, hacha ba'elicha. The brayso, which speaks about preparing it for someone who is ill. When Rameir allows it, it's where non-vigorous beating is done. In other words, you just mix it together, but you don't have to mix it so thoroughly, right? Hacha ba'elecha. But in our Mishnah, which says you can't do it because you need to beat it vigorously. So ask the Gemara, Hachinami, Neved, V'lo Leilach. So in our case, the Milah, so why does it have to be all or nothing? Let the Mishnah say, you can mix them, but don't mix them vigorously. So the Gemara says, you're right. That's exactly what our Mishnah says. What did our Mishnah say? That on Shabbos, you're allowed to put them each together, but not mixing them vigorously. So he says, yeah, that's essentially what our Mishnah is doing. Our Mishnah is telling us, you are allowed to mix them non-vigorously, just like Rameir allows for an ill person by not mixing them vigorously, so too you're allowed to do for Bris Milah by mixing them not vigorously. But mixing them vigorously, that would be something called Uvda Dechol, and you can't do so on Shabbos. Okay? Good? Fine. Let's go further. Tan Rabbanan. You're not allowed to strain mustard seed through its own strainer on Yom Tov. Now, this is strange because normally you're allowed to do borer on Yom Tov. Borer is one, right? Which we're still going to get into more detail of. But basically, normally borer is permitted. But when it comes to mustard seed, you're not allowed to put it through its strainer. Why not? So the Mefarshim, different explanations given. One explanation is that typically mustard was made, what we're referring to over here is not making like a tiny bit of mustard, but normally you make mustard in like a huge amount of mustard in its strainer. And that already is something you can't do on Yom Tov because that's not, you're allowed to make something on Yom Tov for it, for Yom Tov needs. And if that means like, let's say you make a kugel on Yom Tov, okay, so let's say I'm only going to eat half the kugel, okay, fine, that's just like a little bit more. But to go ahead and start mass producing things, which is normally what's done for mustard, that you can't do, right? Borer itself would be allowed on Yom Tov. You're allowed to do borer on Yom Tov for food, but you are not allowed to go ahead and start mass producing things, and that would be the issue with mustard. Okay, nor are you allowed to sweeten the mustard with a burning coal. What that means is the way they would make mustard, they would take away some of the bite of mustard, is they would take a pile of the mustard seeds, they would take a burning coal, stick the burning coal under the mustard seeds, and the fumes would go into it, but it would eventually cause the coal to be extinguished. and that's why you can't do it on Yom Tov, because you're extinguishing something for the food. Okay. Amalei Abayla Rav Yosef. Baisis Rav Yosef, from 134a2. Maishna mehaditznan nostim beitza b'mesanen shel chardal. You are allowed to put a raw egg into a mustard strainer on Shabbos. Okay, now why are you putting an egg into a mustard strainer? So an egg is yellow, right? So what they would do not for the taste, but rather for the look. They want mustard to look very yellow. It looks better, right? If your mustard's like a little like discolored, it's not as good, right? So it's not just like a modern thing where you want to make the food look aesthetically pleasing. They always did this. And what they would do is after they would make the mustard, after they would separate the mustard seeds from its husks, they would then put eggs through the mustard strainer, and it would put yellow into the mustard. And that was done just for aesthetic purposes. So why are you allowed to do that? Amarle, hasam lo mechzi kavarer, hacha mechzi kavarer. When it comes to the egg, it does not appear, everyone understands, an egg going through a strainer, nothing's being strained. The whole thing's just falling through. So it doesn't even appear like borer. When it comes to the mustard seeds, the reason you can't do it is because, although technically it's not really borer, because even the husk of a mustard seed is edible, but it looks like borer because ultimately you're separating one part from the other, and that's why it's not allowed. Okay. The Mishnah, the Brisa said you can't sweeten with a burning coal. Vatanya, but there's a contradiction. Another Brisa says, you are allowed to sweeten the mustard seed with a burning coal. Lo kasha, there's no contradiction. Though the lenient, the permitted ruling is talking about a metal coal, whereas the stringent ruling is a wooden coal. Okay, so what's that all about? The difference is that a wooden coal, the whole issue of extinguishing something is that you're going to take the coal and use the coals for another purpose. The coals themselves are now going once the wood. Once the fire goes out, the wood itself of the coal or the substance of the coal is going to be used for something else. That's typically done for a regular coal, a coal that as opposed to metal coal, it's not going to be reused, and therefore it's not the same level of prohibition, and that's why you are on Yom Tov allowed to do with a metal coal. You're not allowed to do with a glowing wooden coal. Amarle Abayla Rav Yosef, Ma'ishnam Bisra Gumre. Why is this different than roasting meat on burning coals? If you make a barbecue, right, over coals, what happens? The juice comes down, and that sizzling sound, it sounds nice, but what's happening? It's extinguishing the coals. So why are you allowed to do that? Okay, and this goes back to our general principle about Yom Tov, that when it comes to the meat, you cannot make good. You make a steak yesterday, it doesn't taste as good as today. So you are allowed to extinguish. You're allowed to extinguish if it's being done for the sake of the food, right? So if you need that food, the only way to make the ideal food is to do something which would be a malacha, and the only way to have the food taste good is through that, then that's fine, right? It's only when it's something which could have been done yesterday, right? That's when it's going to be problematic. And therefore, when you make a barbecue on Yom Tov, right, and it's extinguishing the coals, the juice is coming down and extinguishing the coals, no problem, because that's the only way to make a good plate, a good steak is to make it today. Again, it's okay if it's yesterday, but everyone's going to agree there's a massive difference. With the mustard, or with the coals, or the coals of the mustard, it's not going to taste different if you made it yesterday, and therefore you must make it yesterday. But important halacha comes out of this that you are not, in addition to some of the other malachos that can be done, you could extinguish a fire if it's being done for the sake of the food. One way that some people want to, people don't like leaving their fire on for Shabbos, their stove top on Shabbos. So one of the things you could theoretically do is you can make yourself a pot of noodles, but fill it up really, really, really high, right? And what would happen is that ultimately the water is going to overflow and it's going to turn out the flame. Okay, so you have to know if the electricity depends on your elements, but then once the flame goes out, turning it off at that point would, just turning the thing off, depends on the element, but it could work that theoretically you could the fire off at that point, and then if it really is like going over, the fire is going to go out, and then you could turn off the elements at that point. Again, if you're using the water, I shouldn't say you're making it like for pasta, making it for like a coffee or something you need it for then, because if the fire goes out, the hot water is not going to be, everyone not going to boil the pasta. But if you're making it you want to make a tea, you could theoretically go ahead, fill up the water, and that will allow it to extinguish, make a big mess, but if it'll make you happy, that's fine. Amalei Abayla Rav Yosef, Mahu legabin. Are you allowed to make cheese on Shabbos? Amalei Aser. On Yom Tov. Of course you make it on Shabbos. Are you allowed to make cheese on Shabbos? Making cheese. Okay, the whole discussion about what exactly is the prohibition, but bottom line is it's something which is normally prohibited on Shabbos. Amalei Aser, he says it's not allowed. Ma'ishnam Elisha. Abaya says, why is it different than kneading dough? Everyone knows you're allowed to knead dough on Yom Tov to make dough. Why can't I knead the cheese, right? That you're making the cheese process, why can't you do it? Again, it's that same difference that to have bread, fresh bread, there's a difference between bread made today and bread made yesterday. A huge difference. Cheese made yesterday and cheese made today. No difference. Ask the Gemara, Amri Nahardai Gvina Bas Yoma Ma'alya. Don't the sages in Narda say that freshly made cheese is excellent? Hachik Amri. No, he says no. Dafilu Gvina Bas Yoma Ma'alya. What they're saying is that even freshly made cheese is great. The chiddush is, the novelty is that even when it's fresh, it's good. But the point is that it's better when it's actually older, right? Certain things are better, like wine is better when it's older, right? So the point of their statement was only to tell you that don't think that you must wait. It's okay to eat it today, but it's certainly not better today. It's better if you made it yesterday, and therefore anything that was better you made it yesterday. Certainly you can't make on Yom Tov, even if it's equal, like Jello. Let's say you have to still make it on Erev Yom Tov and not on Yom Tov itself. Good, fine. Ain't osin lachaluk. You're not allowed to make a shirt-like bandage for the bris milah. It's placed on the bris milah, but you're allowed. Fine, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to create the bandage on Shabbos for the baby. Amar Abaye, 134a3. Abaye says, Amar li'em. Again, my quote-unquote mother said to me, okay, so he's going to give a whole discussion about how to make the bandage in a way, right? It's a very small, wound, and there's a concern. It's open wounds, and there's a concern if you have like this imperfect bandage with loose threads, a thread's going to get embedded into the child, into that area. You're going to pull it off, and you're going to cause real issues. You cause the child to real issues. Okay, so the way to do so, the hem of the bandage should be turned upward. In other words, don't tuck the hem downwards because then the threads are going to get into that area. Tuck them, lift them up, basically, okay? Dilma midbak garda mine, a thread could stick to the wound, and it could mutilate the child. Ime debaya avda kistasa lefalga, the Abaya's mother would make a lining on half of the bandage. By making a lining, it would ensure that none of the threads it would be like a solid lining to ensure that nothing gets stuck there. Abaye, if the infant does not have a bandage, laiti belisa de isle sifsa, take a rag that has a hem, and tie the hem around at the bottom. Notice, where should the strings be loose? On the bottom, not at the top where the wound is, but on the bottom of the member. And double over the top and upwards, and at the top, double it over again, like make the threads go outside in order to ensure there's no issues. If you cannot see where the anus is, it's like closed up for the child, like an infant. Rub the child with oil and put the child outside by the sun. And wherever the skin appears transparent, tear the hole over there crosswise, right? Two directions with a barley grain which is sharp. Okay, basically create the hole. Don't use a metal instrument, mishum dezarif, because that could cause inflammation, and therefore it shouldn't be done. Therefore, use a barley, like something which is sharp but not that sharp. My mother told me, a child who's not suckling, make her dekar pume. It's because the mouth is cold. My tekante, what you do, bring a cup of burning coals, put it near the infant's mouth, so that the mouth become warm, and then the child will suckle. If the child is not breathing, fan him, and then he'll breathe. They still do this nowadays. You have some children, like sometimes they would get their breath, or like sometimes they've been laughing or crying, and they can't breathe. So what do? Just go like this, so blow at them, and then they force them to breathe, and that's still done. If a child's having an issue breathing, bring the afterbirth, and slide it over the flesh, and that will somehow make the child breathe more easily. I can't explain it to you. A child who is emaciated, take the mother's afterbirth, slide it over the flesh. There's a narrow end of the afterbirth, and there's a wider end, and slide it first to the narrow end, and then to the wider end. If the infant is bloated, then slide the afterbirth from the wide end to the narrow end, right, implying that the child should kind of slim down. A child who is red, what that means, the blood was not absorbed yet into the flesh. It means the child is not healthy yet. Okay, wait until the blood is absorbed, and then you could circumcise the child. In the case where the child is yellow, the blood is deficient. Therefore, you should wait until the child is filled with blood, and then circumcise the child. Excuse me. Fine. So basically, if the child is either too red or too yellow, don't do a circumcision. Tanya San and Brisa. I went to visit one of the sea towns. A woman came before me, whose first child was circumcised and the child died right after. The second child was circumcised and died right after. She brought the third child to me, and I saw the child was red. I told her, wait a little bit, don't do it on the 8th day, wait until the blood, quote unquote, gets absorbed into the flesh. She waited until the blood was absorbed, meaning the child had a regular complexion. And what happened? She circumcised the child, and the child lived. They called the child Nathan the Babylonian. Why? Because Nasna Bavli saved this child's life. Okay. Another time I went to Kapotkia. A woman came to me. She circumcised her first child, and the child died. The second child, and this child died. That she brought the third child before me. I saw that he was yellow. And I looked closely. In addition, I saw that the area of the bris milah was extremely pale. It seemed like there was not a regular blood flow there. So 2 issues. Wait until he's full-blooded. Wait until he's no longer yellow. Wait until that area looks regular, like flesh. And she waited. And the child lived. Again, this child was also called Nasan Bavli because of that. Have a great day.